There is a statement in the Medrash Tanchuma by Midbar Rabbah and Shlach that Techelles was nignaz, was hidden, was put away. And based on this Medrash Tanchuma, there are those who argue that once the Techelles was hidden, we cannot wear Techelles anymore until the Mashiach comes. And others say the Medrash doesn't mean that. In fact, it can't mean that because the Techelles was still in use after the writing of the Medrash. People were still wearing Techelles, so it can't mean it was nignaz while people still had it. So Rav Yechiel Michal Tukushansky, he says it means this became less common, but not that it disappeared. So there's a lot of disagreement about it in terms of bringing back the Techelles that was lost. So one of the issues that come up in whether we can bring back the Techelles is obviously, first you have to believe you have the Techelles, and one of the ways to help determine if the Techelles is authentic is through archaeology, science. So the question is, in general, do we accept archaeology in halach? In general, there's a general dispute to Chazon Ish and Rav Kook in terms of how the interface between the two. But the proponents of bringing archaeology bring different rayas from different Gemaras and sources. So let's go through a couple of them to begin. So there's a famous Gemara in Baba Basra, and Daf Ayin Gimel Amid Beis Ayin Daled Amid Aleph. The Rabbi Bar Barachana was once traveling in the Midbar. He had an Arab tour guide, and he went by the graves of the Dor HaMidbar, those who died during the 40 years when the Jews were traveling in the Midbar. And Rabbi Bar Barachana, he wanted to remove one of the tzitzis from one of the bodies, and he wanted to bring it to the Beis HaMedrash, and then everyone could go check it out. And when he came back, he explained to them what happened. He says, "What do? You didn't have to pull them off. I didn't actually need the Techelles. Just tell me what you saw, because there's an earlier machlokas between Beis Hillel and Beis Shammai. In one of the cases where we follow Beis Shammai, how many strings do you have on each corner?" So Beis Hillel says you only need 3, and Beis Shammai says 4. And we have 4 strings, 4 which turn into 8. So they rebuked him, "Why don't you just go ahead and look, and then we'll know how we paskin like Beis Hillel or Beis Shammai." So in the Nefesh Harav, page 53, footnote 26, Rav Hershel Schechter explains that we see from here that Chazal were willing to rely on archaeology. They were willing to look and see. They taking a tzitzis or looking at the dead body and looking what they were wearing. That at least it shows you could take it into consideration. Others disagree and say no. That's the reason why God didn't let it happen, is because He didn't want them to. He wanted to show that you can't bring from archaeology. Either way, but those that's what Rav Schechter brings down. Another raya, potential proof, is there's a smag who writes that we know there's a famous machlokes Rashi and Rabbeinu Tam. We all wear Rashi tefillin, some wear also Rabbeinu Tam. The machlokes is on the order of the last 2 parshios. So Rashi writes in Menachos Lamed Daled Amud Beis that first that Shema should come before V'hayam Shamoa, while Rabbeinu Tam says V'hayam Shamoa goes before the Shema. So many Hasidim wear Rabbeinu Tam as well, but we go with Rashi. So the Smag, in trying to bring us support for our view of Rashi, he wants to say that when they found an ancient old pair of tefillin in the area of Yechezkel Hanavi's grave, and they found it, and it was had the order of Rashi in it. So the Drisha writes, that's no Raya. Maybe that's why it was buried. It was buried because it was a no-go. But yeah, in fact, the fact that it was buried shows that we go Rabbi Tam. And the Bach answers back and says no. That wouldn't be enough to bury them. All you'd have to do is rearrange the order. Like Rashi to Rabbi Tam or Tam to Rashi, you wouldn't have to bury them. But then it must be that wasn't the issue. So that's what the Smag wants to say. So we see from the Smag that one could learn out from halacha, from archaeology. You know, the basic issue we'll have to deal with, and we'll get into is we're talking about how could you base anything just on one pair of tefillin? Like if you have many different, maybe if you found 1,000 pair of tefillin and they were one way, then it would be a proof. In fact, in the 20th century, when in the area by the Dead Sea, we have discovered both types of tefillin. We have found tefillin according to Rashi and Rabbeinu Tam. So that's the first one, is the Gemara learning out from the sitzes from the Meisei HaMidbar. And the second proof is from the Smag by the order of tefillin. The third proof brought down is a Ramban in Sefer Shmos, Perek Lamed Pasuk Yud Gimel, where the Ramban discusses a machlokas between Rashi and the Rif regarding the weight of the shekel, the minimum weight of different coins. And it has to do nafkaminas regarding Pidgin Aben. So Rashi's sheet is it's a little lighter than the Rif, so I think 1/6 lighter, the amount of the coin. So it's interesting, the Ramban originally followed the opinion of the Rif based on his reasoning. Yet he writes that when he made Aliyah, came to Eretz Yisrael, the local people showed him an old coin which said shekel hashkolim on one side and Yerushalayim HaKodesh on the other. And when he weighed it, he found that the weight accorded with Rashi's view. And therefore he concluded Rashi has great support. So therefore the Ramban, we see, changed his mind based on archaeology. It's interesting, even though the Ramban changed his mind, but in Shulchan Aruch, they don't rule according to Rashi, even though they knew about the Ramban's discovery. Why not? So it could be based on two tainas on the Ramban. The Abarbanel notes that it's possible that maybe the shekel lost some weight all the time, but really it was heavier before. And as well, the Tashbetz points out that he didn't like who he relied on. The people who showed the Ramban were anti-Torah, weren't good people, and therefore he didn't like it. These actually, as we said, are two major things that come up today. Number one is you have to find the integrity of the discoveries, that you have to have many, and the credibility of the ones people checking. They're not anti-Torah, they don't have their own agenda. But either way, so we have the sitzes by the Dor Meisei HaMidbar, we have the Machokas Rashi Rabbeinu Tam finding the tefillin of Rashi by Yechezkel's grave, and we have the Ramban switching over to Rashi when he actually found the coin. Yet the Shulchan Aruch doesn't. And a fourth case, it's Gemara in Shabbos, Afsama Gimel Amud Beis, that on the sitz, on the forehead, on the head plate of the Kohen Gadol, so the words said Kodesh LaHashem, holy to God. They were engraved. So it's a machlokas whether they were in the Gemara, whether they were put on one line or two lines. So the Tanna Kama believes it should be two lines, And Rabbi Lezer, the son of Rabbi Yossi, said it should be on one line. So Chachamim say 2, Rabbi Lezer 1. Why does Rabbi Lezer say 1 on one line? Because he said when he went to Rome, he actually saw the sits, and the words Kol Hashem were written on one line. So we see Rabbi Lezer clearly follows archaeological evidence. The Rambam, when he codifies Halach in Hilchos Klei HaMikdash Perek Tes Halacha Aleph, he says, on one hand, we paskin like the Tana Kama that Kodesh Hashem should appear on 2 different lines. However, he doesn't reject totally Rabbi Eliezer, that if it appears on one line, he says it was good. And he says sometimes it was written on one line. So the Machok is Rabbi Eliezer the Chachamim. The Chachamim goes with the Chachamim 2 lines, but doesn't reject Rabbi Eliezer. The Kesef Mishnah over there points out, we see that the Rambam partially goes like Rabbi Eliezer. In other words, because of his claim that he actually saw the sit. So we see another raya that you follow archaeological evidence. But even though the Rambam himself didn't go as far as Rabbi Eliezer did, again because of what we're saying, that he only saw one sit. So therefore, it's possible that the Rambam might change his mind if he got more of them to look at. And that's what so that's another raya they want to bring, that we see we follow archaeological evidence. So they point out that we have these 4 Gemaras to bring a proof that when you want to, that since the Techelles is a lost mitzvah, we don't have it anymore. So therefore, we see that we could go do our diggings, go into the Mediterranean and see, and try to go ahead and determine what the right Techelles. And it's not that the Techelles with Nignaz as others write, that therefore you have to wait for the Mashiach to come. But in others claim no, that it wasn't Nignaz, it got lost because of the upheaval happening in Israel. It wasn't like God took it away from us, at least not directly. And therefore our job is like everything else, is to go ahead and find it. And others claim, well, my father didn't wear it, his father didn't wear it, I want to follow the Masorah of my parents. However, in general we do follow the Masorah, but that's the point, they didn't wear it because they didn't have it. The shaila is, in general, when do you following exactly the way the previous generation did before isn't always the right thing. In fact, we find by Yitzchak, he wanted to go down to Eretz Yisrael, leave Eretz Yisrael from the family like Avram, and yet he wasn't allowed to. Why not? He's following in the front of his father. Eretz says he's different. He's an Ola Tamima. Or by Achan, that Achan was punished. That's why the Jews were losing the wars during the time of Yoshua. So Yoshua said, it's your fault you made a chayim. What do you mean it's his fault? His Rabbi made a chayim. He was following Moshe Rabbeinu. The answer is, during time of Moshe it was okay, but now when Jews entered Eretz Yisrael, it was going to be a time of Kol Yisrael Reivim Zelazeh, based on the Gemara in Sanhedrin. So therefore, therefore you follow your Rebbe sometimes by doing something different. You take those principles and you apply them. So that's that's part of the discussion. One aspect of the issue of Techelles is, can we use archaeological evidence to, not to koveya the halacha, but to koveya the mitzias, and therefore at least treat it at least as suffix Techelles, and then perhaps once we treat it as suffix Techelles, will we then have an obligation to wear the tzitzis? So one issue is the archaeological evidence part. Rav Gershon Henoch Leiner from the Radzina, he he claimed in around 1890 he found it. It was the squid fish. It was squeezing out black, and it wasn't. The problem was it wasn't really staying in. One of the things that Techelles has to stick around. So therefore, he got duped by one of the chemists who made it. Who put in some other things, to keep the color blue and to stay in. And then we'll see Rav Herzog came up with a different, he thought he was wrong and came up with another one. And then later on in the 1980s, we came up with the Murex trunculus, and we found out that as well that dye, once left out in the sunlight, it turned blue. So that's those who wear Techelles. So you have the Razina Hasidim who still wear it the way the Rabbi wore it, but others today wear it based on the fact, on new scientific and archaeological evidence that that this is the one. So we'll have to go into a famous tshuva of the Beis Halevi to the Radzina and the different versions of what he actually said, with tremendous nafkaminas in terms of reinstituting a new mitzvah, kind of like we were discussing with the archaeology. And then we have to discuss some halachic issues, assuming it raises to a level of a suffix. So then, what about suffix deraisa or chumrah? What about the issue about tosa, about tikra? What about how many threads? The machlokas, Rambam, Rashi, and Ravid. How many threads should be Techelles? Is it Techelles? Can you wear Techelles? In other words, part of the issue, can you wear Levin without Techelles? Is Techelles me'akiv or not? And we'll deal with some other issues regarding the Techelles.